Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the Enterprise of Translation, a web series being organized by the Center for Translation and Digital Humanities and Film Society of Ravenshaw University. I'm Urmishri Vedamatta, a coordinator of the center and the Film Society as well. So far in this series, we have met a zoologist who translates whenever he comes across something he feels others ought to know in their own language. We also heard a mariner who took up translation after he felt drawn to the simplicity and the philosophical maturity of a poet and son of the soil. We next heard a film critic in conversation with a scriptwriter as they try to unravel what it takes to represent transgender identity on screen such that it is understood and appreciated by the audience of mainstream cinema. Today, we are happy to bring to you Q and Bhaskar and Subhajit Chatterjee. And Subhajit are joining us from Calcutta. Bhaskar is joining us from Bangalore. Subhajit Chatterjee is assistant professor in the Department of Film Studies in Jadavpur University. He will enter into a conversation with Q and Bhaskar about page, stage, and screen, including the complexities involved in translating from one medium to another. Today's session will be led by Mr. Subrat Beura, who will introduce the speakers of today's session. Mr. Subrat is secretary of the Film Society of Bhubaneswar and the Indian Documentary Film Festival of Bhubaneswar. He is also a mentor to our students associated with the Film Society of Ravenshaw and is actively involved in its affairs. He is a trustee of Center for Human Sciences Bhubaneswar, a research organization that focuses on social sciences research in Odisha. The center also publishes Anvesha, a quarterly journal. I'm grateful to Mr. Subrat Beura for agreeing to lead this session on our behalf. Over to you, Mr. Subrat.
Thank you, Professor Vedmata, for the introduction. So, hello, everyone. Once again, welcome to the Sunday afternoon. And we have a very interesting panel lined up for all of us. And before we get into the details and introducing each one of our members on the panel, there is a chat box on YouTube as well as our Facebook pages. Whenever you're catching them live, do write to us because we have 15 minutes in the conversation scheduled to engage with your questions, right? So with that, it's, thanks to Ravenshaw University, Professor Vedmata, and the Center for Digital Humanities and Translation for organizing this. And this is, I think, is going to be the new format for some time to come before physical assembly is possible with the pandemic raging throughout the world and particularly in India. With that, I'd love to welcome Dr. Chatterjee, who is associated with Jadavpur University with the Film Studies Department. His interests are around Bengali popular cinema, the Indian cult and exploitation cinemas, as well as he has very interesting perspectives on what we see around us in what we call as cinema, or what we call as film. And you will see that coming through when he engages with both Bhaskar and Q. Welcome, Dr. Chatterjee, to the conversation today. And the format would be Dr. Chatterjee will primarily lead the conversation, engage with the audience, as well as Bhaskar and Q. I will go into the background after introducing, and maybe when the question and answers comes in, I'll come back. So with that, again, welcome, Dr. Chatterjee. And I hope you're keeping well in Kolkata. And now it's my pleasure to invite Bhaskar, my friend. Bhaskar Chattopadhyay is an author, translator, and film critic. And Bhaskar and I, personally, we have some kind of a commonality. We went to the same campus in different times in XIM Bhubaneswar. So there is a connection of Bhubaneswar in his life. But Bhaskar has been based in Bangalore for a long time. And I particularly am looking forward to his new piece of translation, Aranyak, which is Bibhuti Bandyopadhyay's classic book that he's translating. And I'm told it's going to come in October sometime. And inshallah, and we will see that book. And if you haven't figured Bhaskar's works, do look out for his works. And if Amazon or Flipkart or bookstores are open in your town, cities, wherever you are, look his works up. I have only seen
cutting up.
will come in the conversation, and he will share his interesting viewpoints about not only text but also how cinema as a form is very different than the text that we read in narrative structures, right? So welcome, Bhaskar.
Thank you for having me.
Now we have Q. Q's right now in Kolkata. I'm told he's been in Kolkata for a couple of months now. Q personally, I first discovered Q when I saw his documentary Love in India, and I fell in love with his work. And most of his works are available for torrent. If you do torrent, do use torrent, or you go to Netflix. Q, I love to introduce him as the pirate in the tradition of Hobsbawm, and he talks about certain issues that people generally shy away from. And I will not waste much time introducing him. You will love to hear him as he takes on some of these pet things that he's been working on. And I know that he is right now working on a new form. I personally waiting to look at his new form. I've seen his graphic novel Gandu Mundu, which I enjoyed. His work as a musician that he keeps sending out on his channel, as well as his works in cinema. So with that, welcome Q, welcome to Bhaskar, as well as Bhaskar, and I'll hand it over to you and I'll go into the background. Thank you.
Okay, so I take this opportunity. Thank you for having all of us, Ravenshaw University, Center for Translation and Digital Humanities, and the Film Society as well. So I will take this opportunity to kind of open up the conversation, but through sort of getting into the crux of the problem that we have at hand. So we are supposed to be discussing translation, but one aspect of it. That aspect is, of course, most commonly experienced as the interface between page and screen, which is the literary text, the script, stroke screenplay, and the screen, the form in which the film comes out eventually. So we will take a look at that, but I have, I'll try to go into some of the very basic problems of this aspect of translation, that is cinematic translation, by taking up certain examples which will help us to open up the conversation, and Q and Bhaskar can take on from there. So the first question that often comes up to my mind, and I use this example precisely because I often also use it in class to lead my undergraduate students into some sort of a response while teaching. So I tell them that there is this very interesting film which was made in the 1990s, and it was a series of films that was sort of produced by BBC, and they wanted to make a series on lives of philosophers. Films, short films, not very long ones, 1 to 130, 1 hour, 130 minutes, on lives of various philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, even more modern philosophers. But almost none of it came out. The one which did come out of this project was something called Wittgenstein. It's based on the life of Ludwig von Wittgenstein, the Austrian-born philosopher of early 20th century, mid 20th century. So I'll begin with that example because that is a very interesting case. I often ask my students that if you take some of the basic facts of the life of this philosopher, for example, that he was born in Vienna, Austria in 1889, that he was a prodigy, that he was born into a very rich family comprising of eccentric relatives. Eccentric but very talented relatives. And if you have these three sentences as your leading synopsis or as part of your script, how do you then bring that out onto screen? Now, this is a very interesting question because out of 9.5 out of 10 times, I've never seen an exception till date. I'm hoping to see one. Everyone, and this doesn't only concern students, also my friends and others whom I meet, if you ask this question, they will typically tell you that the first scene would be in a class, and this young Wittgenstein will come up to the board and solve a mathematical problem, and the teacher will be perplexed. Or he is doing something at home, and his father asks him what he's doing, and then suddenly realizes that he's solving some great mathematical theorem. Now this is really a problem. The problem is here, as I understand it, that if you look at these three lines, Wittgenstein was born in Austria, 1889, that he was a prodigy, and that he was born into a wealthy family of eccentric, talented people. Do I need to first set up Vienna, set up his childhood in a house with people around him who are wealthy and eccentric, and also try to prove that he's a prodigy by making up an event which shows it? So the question that I have here is, if prodigy and eccentricity are two working ideas here which require translation from the page to the screen, then do we translate them as time events? That is, in terms of certain events that happen in time. So we see his father quacking or his uncle, jumping around to prove that he's eccentric. Do we need him to solve a mathematical problem in class to, prove that he is? Now, why I pick up this example is that the director of that particular film, and this is again a very interesting case. The script of the film, original BBC production, was written by a Marxist scholar of great repute, Terry Eagleton. He wrote the first version of the script, and he said that film in a typically realist manner in Cambridge, 1930s, trying to pick up what Wittgenstein was doing back then, his struggle with the academy. Now, when the filmmaker, Derek Jarman, who is a British experimental filmmaker, a painter, a very eminent political activist, and a gay rights activist, and a very severe critic of Thatcherite Britain, is a very important figure in experimental cinema of the 1980s and 90s. When Derek Jarman rewrote the script for the film, he just changed the entire thing. Now, what does he do? He sets up a black screen curtain, a black curtain, and puts a table in front of the curtain and puts a chair and makes this child Wittgenstein sit there. And this fellow recites a line from Wittgenstein, looks up at the screen and says, "I am Ludwig von Wittgenstein. I was born in Vienna, 1889. I am a prodigy." But the interesting point here is that the child is wearing a suit. He is speaking in an accent and tone which is typical of adults, matured adults. He's wearing clothes, he's wearing spectacles, which gives you the flavor of an academician working at a university. But it is not a university. It is not a setting where it's a proper room. And of course, this is a child. You can see the contradiction. So now it's very interestingly, what I tell my students is that, you see, there is something that Derek Jarman sees it as a problem, which is not a problem of translating time events. It's a problem of translating what is a prodigy. So if you look into it, it's very simple. Prodigy is a contradiction in terms. It's a child speaking in an adult's voice. It's somebody who is innocent, who is taking up things which are not up in his realm. He's a contradiction in terms. He's like a child who talks in a language, who dresses up in a form which doesn't suit him or her. So this idea of this aspect of the prodigy itself, the problem of the individual itself, who has to take up something, who has to take up a calling due to certain set of circumstances, which produces a contradiction in terms from the very beginning, is the beginning of a problem. You see, the idea is that here you have a peculiar, complex individual. He doesn't have his childhood. He is, already into certain things which does not fit his age, his, sensibility as a child. He is having contradictory sort of forces working with him. Now, this is, if you translate it, so I call it translation in terms of conceptual categories. You see, so very interestingly, when the book, a book version of this film was released, this is both the scripts were released, and there, Derek Jarman says something very interesting. He says, my film does not portray or betray Ludwig Wittgenstein. Very important words, does not portray nor betray. My film is there to open up. It is logic. And this is very interesting that, and I put forward this question and, begin to sort of, the conversation is one of the tasks of cinema is actually to open up the text. It's not to realize what is written in the text. It's not to realize what you have as your raw materials. Wittgenstein was a great philosopher. You can read that anywhere. Wittgenstein went to Cambridge and talked to Russell. We know that. This is written in history books. But what is a philosopher? What is a prodigy? What is it to be within an eccentric, situation in early 20th century Austria? These are things which are important and which you have to open up, which the text will not tell you behind. It's somewhere there, which you have. So the idea that Derek Jarman has is the important one, and this is what I would like to ask both Q and Bhaskar. Q primarily because he's a filmmaker, Bhaskar definitely because he's also translating, things, and often translating the other way. I know that he has novelized Nayak. So it's an important thing that, you have raw material with which you have to actively engage. You have to open it up. You have to, hit it. You have to sort of make an impact on it so that sort of it comes out. So I think we could take this as the first kind of issue. Does translation mean literal translation of time events, or does translation, would it mean reading into, making an impact and opening up conceptual categories which require elaboration? Bhaskar can, take it up in terms of what you think of translation as a critical task issue.
But you see, I'll try to break it down into very, very simple elements first. Okay. So when I was a little child, when I was a little boy, I was a loner, and I used to read a lot. We had this wonderful Bengali novels written for teenagers and so on and so forth, and children. And I used to read them, and sometimes I used to find them very special. And I was very close to my mother, and she used to go around the house doing chores and such things. And I used to just walk behind her, and I used to tell her the stories that I had read. And in doing so, I did the first basic elements, the first basic activities of translation. Because what I had read was not always what, I was telling him in letter. I was telling her the overall story. And you must understand that, what I had read was in the form of a print medium, of a published book or some sort of a magazine or something like that. But what I was telling her was in the form of an oral storytelling, Yeah. So did I always tell her exactly in as many words as what I had read? No. Was I able to convey the spirit of the story, the message of the story, the thrill of the story, the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the joys and sorrows, and various elements that go ahead and make up the story what it is? Was I able to convey that to her? I would like to believe yes. So, so I agree with you when you say that translation does not always necessarily have to be in, like a literal translation. And it is, if you do that, it might sometimes work. Like in 2 out of 10 cases, it might sometimes work when you are translating something from literature into literature. But it is like in 10 out of 10 cases, it is going to fail if you're translating it from one medium to another. Like, for example, the literary medium to the visual medium, because these are two completely different things. Cinema, for instance, is a medium of forced projection. Okay, when you read a book, you read something. Okay, there's something is happening inside a room, and you have you create that as a reader. You create an image of that in your mind from what you read. Not all of it is spelled out. Not all of it is described to you in absolute detail, in 100% detail. But you create that kind of an image. It's almost like almost like creating a dream state. You create that image for yourself. In cinema, there is no scope for that freedom. There is no degree of freedom on, at least one form of cinema, one kind of cinema. That degree of freedom is not there. The filmmaker is forcing that image into your brain, which is why if I were to take a novel by, let's say, Ray or Vibhuti Bhushan, and if I were to try to adapt it in the same way that it has been written, it is bound to fail. There is no doubt about it. So I personally feel that translation needs to be handled with care, and it has two parts. You have to lift it from the source, then process it, make it ready for the destination medium, and then put it in the destination medium with care. At the same time, I believe that there are several ways of doing this transformation. The example that you just gave, where the actor was asked to come over there, sit in front as a child, and his projections were that of which were not fitting of his age, and so on and so forth. That is one way of doing it. There are several others. So as long as we take care to see that the spirit, what we are trying to say, is being delivered in the destination medium as well, to the best possible, as much as it is possible. That is fine. I mean, then of course the artist has, the creator has his or her own liberties to do that. What are the details of that process, and so on and so forth. But what actually matters? Why are you doing translation? Translation is nothing but an act of sharing. I went and told those stories to my mother because I wanted to share the stories with my mother. That's all. There's nothing more. It's very simple, really. So it is an act of sharing, and as long as your primary purpose of sharing as much of the original meaning with your audience or with your new reader or whatever is concerned, if that is done, it's fine. It works.
Okay. I'll now come to Q and ask him a kind of direct question. And this is something that I was always inquisitive about after watching his Tasher Desh, which I really like as a film. And I find it also relevant to a very generic question about translation, which people ask. How to adapt a tale which is not set in our time, which is not part of our experience. A fairy tale, something that's happening in a faraway land. Something like Tasher Desh, where the prince and the merchant's son are having a conversation. So I give you the example, and I have my own interpretation of it, and I want you to come in on it, not answering my question so much as to reflect on his work as a translator, cinematic translator. See, at the very beginning, Tasher Desh begins with a conversation between the prince and his friend, the merchant's son. And the prince says that he is Rajbari Raghe Dingulo. These, I call it a depressing monotony. Anyway, monotonous days of the palace is what he abodes. And he is anxious, he wants to escape, and he conveys his anxiety and his, depressed or state of mind to his friend. And he says, Arto cholche na bondhu. He says, Rajbari Raghe Dingulo. He says, Nijeke mone hoy sonar mondire pathorer devota. I feel my soul as if it is a stone god trapped in a golden palace. Now, how do we translate that? Now, again, there are, as Bhaskar rightly says, there are various ways of doing it, as long as you have this purpose of sharing succeeds. However, there is also a matter of choice of who, and this I called the problem of adaptation requiring a creative rationale and desire. Why do I adapt? Why would I tell Noshtonir again? Why would I tell Tasher Desh again? Why would I translate Nayak from one medium to other? And there are always reasons for doing things. And this is very important because those reasons also mark on how the translation needs to be done. So what Q does is very, very unique. One part of it is a standard procedure. He has two anxious kids playing table tennis. But the point that got me interested, apart from the frenzied, to capture the anxiety, he changes the camera angles, puts multiple camera angles, and you have a rhythm which also is a tedious rhythm. Anybody who plays table tennis would know that table tennis is an exciting and a very tedious game. It's a repetition of certain movements, which which could convey this idea of monotony. So he chooses that particular time event as something that could add to the translation. But what is more interesting is the architecture. Now, Q, I remember that in your promotional stills, you called it tube lighting, because you were actually using tube lights in places in the palace. Now, what immediately got conveyed to me was something interesting, that this palace was not looking like a palace. It was looking like a plastic thing. Something that will, if you push it, it will break down. Something that you can make out that it's fake. But at the same time, it was lighted in a very startling manner. And it reminded me of a puja pandal, Durga Puja pandal. But a Durga Puja pandal after Dashami, you see that idol has been immersed. The light is still burning, but people are gloomy because the life has left God in the form of festivity. God is alone. He is trapped. He or she is trapped. And there is a sense of dejection. Now, the idea is that how do I then make sense of this depressing monotony that the prince was talking about? Because I am not a prince. My audience is not a prince. What do they understand by monotony? What do they understand by repression? How can I bring a certain kind of refractive element into bring what is our commonsensical urban understanding of dejection? For a Bengali, it's a very good example to get. I know that Q may not have actually thought of a Durga Puja pandal when he was doing it, doesn't matter. But it carries a certain, so again, this is a choice that he is making, to make the palace into an artificial plastic thing, to light it in a certain way that it reminds you of, in fact, I would tell you that I have often in other connection, not directly on a lecture in Tasher Desh, I have used Durga Puja pandals and shots from Q's film back to back, and people cannot differentiate. So there is an extension between this idea of post-festivity depression and the kind of depression that these kids have. Now, this is again the question that why do you translate? I mean, for example, as a filmmaker, when you are choosing something, there's a rationale. Now, that might be very personal. I know you have a personal rationale when you are translating Tasher Desh, but that is not what your audience will have. So how do you deal with this? That I have a certain sense and logic of why I am adapting, but my sense and logic has to be reflected in more broader abstract terms, so that a broader understanding is generated by it, not only the specific one that I am having. How do I move from this singular personal interpretation of translation to a broader one?
Yeah. Well, super academic discussion, this one, which is fun. Okay, but I mean, hardcore question. But yes, I do completely agree with you on this example. I didn't think you'd pick this example, but I should have, because I thought you'd pick Novarun because it's a much more like a closer connect in terms of the translation of the man's work and my work and how that relationship was. That's a closer connection and closer translation. than translating Tagore, which evidently, and I have never hidden it at all, was a completely personal exercise. I was basically trolling Tagore, and I wanted to see how people would react if something that they knew in a language that they knew, the nuances that they were used to, were challenged vociferously with nuances that they were really was around them also, right? But like how the language militia or the language hierarchy in Bengal works is that we have the Tagores and the Rays, and then there's everybody else, and then at the bottom are the Gandus. So, and the Gandus are the ones who work in the decorator shops. They don't care which pujo it is. It is not their pujo. They run the decorator shop. They own the tube light. All those bloody tube lights go and light up all the gods and goddesses. And we have something in film language which is called service light. You see, there's this Bejonma, this low class light which serves you before and after the shot.
Okay.
For the shot, there are upper class lights. There are heightened lights, there are HMIs, and only film makers can understand this. Nobody else understands it. It's a Brahminic language that is not known to anyone else but those people who know that language. And we are talking about language and translation. So I'm just getting into this for a second. Bear with me. So I thought that would be an interesting counter perspective to have. That I was always sitting in Pocha's shop. Pocha was my friend, and he had his brother, elder brother, had the decorator shop, and we used to hang out there. And Pocha would go and, like, we also had our para pujo. Pocha's brother would bring the lights. Pocha would set them up. So I was much more with Pocha on this kind of through the Barwari pujos of Calcutta, which could be anything. It could be, from a Saraswati to a Lokhi to whatever you wish. They all needed these lights. And before and after the pujo was there would be service lights. Same way as a film set. So the service lights were for the slaves who worked on the lights to make them work. And once they were lit up, these fuckers had to go out. Okay. So my thing was that if I were to light up that place, which was actually a magnificent palace. It's a ruin of a Shatmohala palace. It's beautiful looking. The more light it gets, the more it shows itself. But the service light doesn't make it feel like that. So once I knew this, then it was the fight with the cinematographer as to how we will open up our, the technicalities of filming. Like, how do you shoot with such low light? Also the flickering color temperatures. So will then the language not be compromised? And this is a conversation that I had with my DOP, which was also about translation. The translation of that idea of Tagore, which we are now placing in a ruin, which is not our present. The only present things that are there is the table tennis board, is the table tennis board, the rackets and the ball, and the tube lights. And then also when we approached the costume, we thought, okay, let's translate this also in a way that we can, the youth now can understand it. But hello, no youth of Bengal dresses like that. We suited them up like, Federer and, Federer was playing, and McEnroe. Onubroto looked like McEnroe for me, with his hairdo and his headband. So I was kind of looking at this elite game, that tennis that we used to know of with headbands and people that we could never be, that for me was the elite. These two boys were elite. They were just like that. This was obviously a fake palace, past, past its prime, and the fact that the gods have now, your gods are, everybody's left. The ceremony is over, basically. So it's kind of like how in the 60s they were saying the ceremony is about to begin. I find that our time reflects more like the ceremony has fucking ended. We should know that. So as my job as a translator, in this case, translating somebody's work which is lost in a cultural myopia, and to bring in these reference points that my immediate reality was not conscious about. These two were the guiding factors in constructing a language that would be worthy of translation. It's not just the words, but the words also make a lot of difference. While you were saying that, I quickly checked up Tasher Desh, that sequence, and I've completely forgotten how I had done it, because the translation for me was like a rap exercise at that point. Subtitling for any film of mine has always been for me a current exercise. Like, I would take that once everything is done, I would sit down and translate the whole thing in one go. And it's like writing a rap, because you're just vibing with the present moment. You are not going back and academically questioning why the fuck did I write that? Oh shit, that sentence. No, I'm going for the beat. Now I'm looking at the image, there's sound, there's, somebody saying something. Then when that happens, when the words come, I've always seen that the power, my power or our power, international artists working out of local areas, the power is in the subtitle. The power is, what do I tell you, my audience who does not know my reality? Because my audience in my reality does not want to acknowledge my words. So therefore, it is for you that I will translate, the ones who do not really understand the reality.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that that's interesting, because you brought in certain technical things which are also very helpful for us to understand what you were doing from your perspective. But very interestingly, you see, as Derek Jarman put it, that I was not portraying or betraying. You did not portray exactly what Tasher Desh did, but you did not because you see, both the temple and the palace are consciously there in Tagore. Tagore also knew that the palace was not a palace. Absolutely. It had to be analogized to something else in order to bring that out. Now, what these two things will be in your imagination is your power of translation. And again, as you said, that's a very important thing. And I want to come back on Bhaskar, because this is something that I had not thought of. Q's answer led me to it. That when you write a novelization of Ray's work, or when you translate Ray into, I know for one that Ray has been translated earlier by, I think, Gopa Majumdar, who has translated it earlier in the 2025. But you are retranslating it. It's your own work. You're giving it a new spin. You are retranslating. I'm sure it has been translated. I don't know for sure though. But when you are doing such things, what are you thinking of? Who is the reader? For example, it is not common for every Bengali to pick up a English book of Ray's translations and read it, right? So you are not thinking of your uncle who will buy the book and read it. As Q was saying, that Q is not thinking of your Pasher Buddy, elder brother going and watching Tasher Desh. He's thinking of something else altogether, something outside the family. In your work, as a translator, and I mean, novel writing is a different issue, related but different issue. When you translate, what is it that you have in mind, and who are you trying to reach, and why? Why do you think, for example, Nayak's novelization might make some sense, might bring something, and for whom? What is that?
It's a good question, and it's ideally you would like to think that this is something which anybody and everybody would like to pick up and read. but that is in the most ideal situation. So one thing that I do know is that that in all probability, I am not writing for somebody who has already read the Bengali version, the original, this one. Most probably it would not. I mean, that would be something, I mean, they would, if somebody would do that, that would purely be out of academic interest.
Academic, yeah.
Yeah. But would somebody sitting in Connecticut, like an American sitting in Connecticut, or like a Dakota or somewhere, pick up the book and will I be able to hold his or her attention by saying what is happening in the rural, far-flung, God-forsaken forest lands of Bihar, where this character is stranded. That ideally should be my thought process. But then one thing that I'd like to say here is that if I were to constantly keep thinking about that now, I'll go crazy. My head is going to explode. So I think the primary reader that I'd like to write for is myself. That is the most important member of the readership that I have in mind at any given point of time, because only then will I be able to do at least some justice to it. If you were to extrapolate me as a reader to the rest of the readership, it will be a very bad extrapolation, obviously, right? Because you are extrapolating from one person to a million, hopefully a million readers, right? But one has to do with it, because and that's the challenge. One has to do with it. One has to accept those limitations, and then continue to write. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Let me give you an example. Okay, like for example, let's say, and I'm not talking about Vibhuti Bhushan's work. Let's say anybody else's work, but let's say there is a situation where there is a woman who lives in a village, and after finishing her day's work, she takes a bath, and she comes and she's combing her hair, and then she applies sindoor or vermilion on her head, and that's all that the author has written. And for the rest of the story, throughout the rest of the story, we never see her husband. Okay. Now, if I were to do a literal translation of this, then a person sitting in India or in the subcontinent, some parts of the subcontinent at least, will perhaps understand that this woman is a married woman, or she believes she is a married woman, despite the fact that we never see her husband for the rest of the story. But somebody who is sitting in, let's say, Surrey or some part of the US will not be able to get this concept that a person who is wearing sindoor on her head is a married woman. Okay. Now, what I'm trying to say is that when I translate, I have to accept certain limitations. Okay. Now, can I translate? And in doing so, I know that I am leaving a trail of gaps in between. And as a translator, I would like to go back to the translation, which is why we keep on translating and retranslating a work. That's part of the process, actually. And we see as to, okay, this is what I have done. The first draft of it is something which will probably be understood by me and others like me who understands the nuances, the milieu, and so on and so forth. But will this be understood? Will somebody who is sitting in some other part of the globe be able to understand this? Am I conveying what Vibhuti Bhushan or Ray wanted to convey in their works to to us audience who is alien to this milieu? Now that is something where we try to fill in the gaps, and in doing so, we take certain liberties as well. Now, if I were to say that, okay, Vibhuti Bhushan has perhaps not written this in his book, so I should not write this in my book, one must understand that I am doing a disservice to both Vibhutibhushan as well as the reader. Because when Vibhutibhushan wrote it, he wrote it with a particular target audience in mind. He did not possibly think about somebody who is sitting in the US or England and reading it. But I have to do it because my audience is the English reading and the English speaking audience. So I may take some liberties there, and I may fill in some gaps over there, which the original author in his original work did not do, for the sake of, again, the one basic principle that I spoke about earlier is the act of sharing. If I have to do it, if I have to convey that message, I will take those liberties and do it. So to answer your question, I'm not sure whether I've answered your question 100% or not, but to answer your question, a readership ideally should be anybody and everybody who is able to read that language. But I also understand that trying to cater to everybody, and I'm sure in the cinematic medium also it's the same thing. Trying to cater to everybody is a recipe for disaster. Okay, so one just have to, one just has to know when to stop and how much to do it, and that's about it. I mean, it's a very organic process. There's no formula to it actually. Yeah.
No, oh, yeah, good. Okay, thank you. There are a few questions coming from the audience which I can see here. I will come to it. One is entirely Q's area. So he is somebody who can, literally speak on volumes on this. I don't know whether you can also see the questions. I believe you can on the right-hand side. So somebody is asking about the translation of slang. How can one translate slang language, given that it has a very specific cultural context? Yeah, and this is, of course, something that Q has dealt with. The other one is the question I was about to lead into later on, which is the question of historical translation, moving from past into present, contextualized. So let me break it up, because these two are separate questions. We can bring in Ray for the second question, because I have something interesting to sort of as a discussion entry point to mention there. But yes, to rephrase the question from the audience, which Sanket Panda has given, yeah, we know that if you make a film like Gandu and it is being watched in Germany or USA, in France, whatever, people are swearing. But there's a specific, and one beautiful thing about Gandu is the way in which the camera, despite all the brashness, makes you have some kind of affect for these characters who are speaking in a rash language, and they are cursing each other. But there is a sweetness, there is a certain level of simplicity, there is a certain level of affect, animated affect, which is coming out. And this is very hard to handle, because you are dealing with rude, brash kids. And you were steering away from this realist project of making, showing Gandu was so, poor and, dejected fellow, his mother did not. So you are leaving aside all the kind of what we call identification keys, where you feel sympathy for the character, which is the mainstay of any standard popular, cinema. So, in a way, it is an interesting question. You are putting slang to some sort of a use, knowing fully well that when he says Gandu, Vancho, whatever is being sort of said by this character, it has a restricted sense of meaning. When you say asshole, it doesn't come in. Right. So how do you deal with that? How do you think one would deal with translation of Nomarunals? If you were to translate Nomarun's Khataru into one short story, what would you do with it? I mean, do you have any thought? Obviously, you would have thoughts about it. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, it's a really cool question. The the major difference between academic or let's say pure uh, pure language or um, uh, mm, established language, what we call bhodro or social language, it's super confusing, right? Everyone knows this. It's first of all, language is constantly shifting. Cultural mores and social values are slipping. So every 15, 20 years, you have to re-establish the meaning, or some people die holding on to the old meanings of things and names and stuff that we call things. So we have a huge head start on this, I think, because what happens is slang doesn't have that problem. You see, because in any culture, however colorful slang can be, it's also super simple. It's extremely efficient. One word can take on multiple meanings, so they're flexible. It's basically it's race. It's about jati. It's the system that people at the bottom at a disadvantage. Out of the disadvantage, the people at the bottom make things because they can make only few things. They make it very, very durable. So I could easily find the exact German word for Gandu as I wanted to for it to be. It was so simple. It was done in 2 minutes. Just had to ask 3 German friends, what is that guy called? What do you call that guy? That's it. You got the fucking word, and Wixer. It was not the one that a translator would translate, but the actual word was Wixer, or an asshole in America, or a cunt or a faggot in UK, or anywhere you go, you'd find a relevant, exact same meaning and enriched with their own cultural specifics. There will be a parallel word, always. So this is much simpler for people who actually are working with slang, translating slang. Because the word fuck, as you can see in Kendrick Lamar's poems or Dot Park's poems, now the black poet is now cool, right? And now they can win Pulitzers, and now everything is possible. So you see the amount of fucks used in a certain poem, and you see the difference in which that one word is holding up sentences, so to speak, almost. You take it out of that sentence, the sentence almost collapses. But the next sentence, which also uses the same word, means completely different. That word has a different meaning, and you know that, despite you reading that one word over and over again. So this is something that now I think is a great time to, because establishments worldwide and everywhere are sort of crashing, and there are great doubts about the veracity of language and cultural mores and social values that had been set up and were irrefutable and were never to be doubted. Those are all going to get questioned. And when you question them, the question will be super simple, which will be you will be able to translate into any language very, very simply. So what the fuck is going on? So that's gonna, the moment you get into academia, then you get into, oh fuck, what do I call this word now? What did the poet want to know? For us, the fight is super simple, and it's super simple in any language.
Might I add something to what
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just
please,
said?
please, go ahead.
I think to the person who asked the question, Sanket, finding the right word for a cuss word or a swear or something like that in another language is not the problem. Being open enough and free enough and devoted enough to use that word in your translation, because then you cross all your own moral whatever things that you have decided for yourself, to cross that hurdle in your head and to put it on paper and send it out to the press. That is the problem. I don't think what Q is saying is absolutely correct. I think finding the word, because there is always an expression. Why do you use a cuss word? There are several reasons that you use a cuss word or a swear or a slang, right? Now, those reasons are universal reasons. You either feel very frustrated or angry or sad or whatever, and because those reasons are universal, there is going to be another word for that in other language as well. So finding the word is not a problem, but you just need to cross over that mental hurdle of yours and use it in your text, thinking that, oh, I am going to use this word. So that is a bit of a problem.
Okay. We'll take up the second question. Shikha Maharshi has, when someone wants to make a documentary on a historical monument, it's a temple, how can we tackle the issue of translating past? Now, this is, for me, I'll take this question in a slightly broader mode and bring in something that many students, young people, even, professional, cinematography, script writers grapple with, filmmakers, which is translating as contextualizing. For example, I'm again bringing up Ray because Bhaskar has dealt so densely with Ray in his work. See, Nostonir can be translated 1,000 times. It can be translated from language to language. Films can be made out of it. But consider this thing, that if you tell the story of Nostonir, the broad skeletal structure of the story, of an adulterous affair of 19th century housewife, nobody would even take simple interest now. In every serial, every soap, they would have this story. What is the big deal about it? So one of the ways in which popular cinema deals with this problem is by updating the context. So if you were to make Charulata, you would make Charu emailing, texting instead of writing a letter. You'd make the husband into a journalist. You'll make this boy, his young, to be some musician or a rock guitarist, and then you retell the story. You're trying to translate the most basic skeletal structure of the story, and you are trying to update the context. Now, this is a big issue and a big problem, because this seems to be, again, one of the, among the many choices, the most established choice, the most commonly taken route of translation. Now, for me, whenever I
isn't that one question, quick question in that while you were on that topic, is that not a tool that means translation by default becomes a tool of cultural hegemony? So the exact example that you gave is so pertinent that today an OTT channel will do the same shit, show that same girl in that same house, but nobody will be talking about that as the prison. Oh, the prison, normalizing that scene for 100 years and still going on normalizing it just by translating verbatim. Right, so that's a big problem. That's an essential. So the first translation, and here is where I would like you to talk about open source coding a little bit, because today I think everything is, for me, in my mind, is coming back to that logic. That okay, protect the source, but how are you letting the source pollute an entire things that are coming out of the source once it's out, once Rabindranath has written something. Now, a series of translations will happen in different forms, which will create a social situation which will soon go out of control and in the hands of only a chosen few.
Yeah, this. See, yes, I mean, how that control, what, to my mind, what you speak of hegemony, Bhaskar can come in on also on this whenever you feel like it. See, the problem of hegemony is precisely the problem of setting the rules of what it means to translate. You see, most 9 out of, that's why I would ask the question, the first question to many people, what do you do when somebody writes that, Beethoven was a prodigy? 9.9 out of 10 people will say you saw Beethoven, doing this classical piece of music and his father taken aback. Now, why does, let's say, at least 3 of them not say, I don't want them to do the exact thing what Derek Jarman did. That's not something ideal. But something different. Something which will not take this as a time event and do something else with it. Maybe not in the same conceptual category. So, for me, the idea is that it's not a question that sex sells. But even if adultery was the issue, why not translate the idea of adultery itself and deal with that problem in different? But you wouldn't do it because there is some legitimacy to this method of translation, which is what you are describing as hegemony. That no matter what you think, other choices will get submerged, and the choice which will be dominant is to exactly do it this way. Now, coming back to this problem, see the problem. I mean, two examples given, because in my own research work I have come across this, and I do work now on the lowbrow cinema circuit. Now, one lowbrow version of that, one version of Charulata could be, I keep on forgetting the director's name, Charulata 2011, Ognidev Chatterjee's film, where he does exactly what I was describing. He makes Charulata into a modern story with a hot housewife, typical pornographic imagination of a hot housewife, next door housewife, and he, updates the story. There, Charulata also gets pregnant, because he has to imply that, Tagore left sex explicitly out of. Now, very interestingly, I have seen the lowest of the low Charulata, which nobody sees, but it's on YouTube also. This is a Charulata made by this couple. This is a brother duo like Kanti and Kishan Shah, called Vishwajit and Prosenjit Ghosh. And when they adopted Charulata, they went the other way around. They don't know, they have no clue about culture or anything. Their understanding of culture is so basic, minimum, and so simple that they come out with this thing that, okay, Charulata. So I read the novel and I start, adapting Rabindranath, not contextualizing it. So Charu is this village girl who gets married into, so he brings in the child bride. Then he adds some whiplash sound because he has seen somewhere in Megadakatara something like that happen. So he brings this, and he is doing it precisely to understand that, oppressed housewife, what images do I have in my culture too? And then it becomes quite something else. This Nostonir goes completely bizarrely out of hand, and it goes into a territory which could be deemed as a bad translation by, let's say, the literati. But it does something else. It breaks down your stereotypical hegemony of what are the ways of imagining Nostonir. This is exactly why, to come back to Q's point, this lack of culture shows you an entry point into. Now, they don't have the professional merit of being able to make a film. They are exploitation filmmakers trying to make different kind of things, and one of the things that they want to work on is because they think Rabindranath is great, as all Bengalis do. So they also wanted to make a Rabindranath. So this is again a very peculiar example of how the lowest of the low actually can break down this precisely. Now, they are not using slang, but their version of Charulata is exactly like using slang in Charulata. there's a scene in which Bhupati thrashes Charu out and carries her by the hair and takes her to the veranda and almost starts beating her. Then there is a lesbian scene between Monna and Charu who try to kiss, but they are also not quite sure what to do with the lesbian scene because the directors have no idea how to shoot any, and they are also not activists or academicians. But what they know is that I have the freedom, so I have to now imagine a Charulata. And interestingly, this imagination is not being restricted by those, typically, modern contextualized codes.
what the example that you're the example that you're taking is exploitation cinema, and exploitation cinema has had long culture of this, like, don't care what the source is, I would just do my shit with it, and show my cultural idioms and my immediate reality reflected through that work. I'm just using your thing because everyone knows it, so maybe people will watch it because nobody will watch my film otherwise, or read my book. So it has something very deep in terms of economic logic and social logic, in the way that people are accessing that information and then trying to translate it.
Right. Absolutely. So so again, this question, to come back to the question that has been asked, actually, this is a legitimate question. What do we do with things of the past? What do we do with the building that has to be 19th century? What do we do with the language that they used to speak? How do I? So as a translator, Bhaskar, how do we answer such a question? How do we for the standard aspirant of translation, what is the way to go about translating, contextualizing without this hegemonic fashionability not engulfing you in completely?
I don't know. I mean, first of all, I'm not quite sure what is the standard aspirant of translation. Do you mean that somebody who is just?
No, I just mean that if somebody is given a project, let's say as he or she is in a college and he has been asked to write a sample script or write a sample screenplay on Tagore text. Now he or she would find immediately that, let's say, Jogajog takes place in this or Choket Bali takes place in this palatial house, this typical kind of house. People would wear typical kind of saris. So do they then try to find a house like that, try to find saris like that? I mean, would that be the the standard aspiration, or is there a way to figure out this idea of movement from past to present? How do we move? How do we contextualize it and make it into a modern story? I mean, see, Shondip Rai, for example, one of the standard answers that he gives to any question asked to him is said that, there are certain things which are modern, so we have to add some things to Satyajit Ray to make, for example, Feluda has a gun now.
Okay, yeah. So
this is becoming standard logic. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Right. I do not subscribe to Sandeep Rai's logic, of course, but at the same time, I do not. So I do not subscribe to those two beautiful words that he uses in his logic, which is "have to." No. So it is up to him to do it because he's a creative person, so he can go ahead and do it. But when he says that we have to, that is a completely different statement to make altogether, which means that anybody, any artist or any creator would have to do that, which is completely wrong. So to answer your question, if I were to, if an aspirant were to be given, let's say a Nostroneer, and said that go ahead and film it, go ahead and adapt it into a film, he or she may or may not choose to use, one of the two options which are available to him or her. In fact, there are more than two options available to him or her. He may or may not say that, okay, I am going to look for a palace like this. Like in the case of Joltraghar, Ray did a massive hunt for a palace like that. He may say that I'm going to completely modernize it. Like for example, Apurna Sen completely modernized Ghare Baire recently, right? So, so that is one choice that the creator makes. the other choice that the creator can make is that I'm going to take the spirit of the story and I'm going to do something totally different which nobody has ever thought of ever. Like for example, can I not have a illicit like an illicit relationship between Charu and his brother-in-law? Can I have something totally different between Charu and his brother-in-law, which is equivalent to an illicit relationship? I don't know what it is, but I'm just saying, so when a creator sits down and says that this is the source material that I have and I have to adapt it to a completely different medium, the playground is out there in the open, unless of course he or she is bogged down by certain limitations. For example, if there's a producer in the picture and says that you have to do this, or you cannot do anything else, or something like that. So if you are a creator who is independent, and if you are open enough, and so all these different possibilities are open to you. And look, I have never been a very staunch believer in saying that you have to do this, you have to do that, and this is this and this is that. Everything is fine. You just choose your path and work on it. That's it. And to answer the lady's question, I think she was talking about temporal translation versus spatial translation. I personally believe that temporal translation is easy to do because you can associate metaphors and motives and meaning interpretations to it. You can contextualize it to the modern era. You can say that no, I want to stick to what they did. For example, this recent movie that came out called Bulbul on Netflix. They decided to do something like that, which is fine. What they did is not what we are discussing over here, but then they did it. But they could have done it in the modern era as well, which is also something that has been done in a previous film called Three. So all of that is fine. You can do it, and one must not think that I have certain limitations that I need to work with, because then you are constraining yourself, and that is never a good idea for. It's never a good. At least self-imposed constraints are never a good idea for artists.
Okay, so we are coming to a closing towards the end of the session, and we will take just one or two small questions. I'll just wrap up the discussion we were having by saying that yes, Bhaskar is quite right, and we need to think beyond these two very obvious options. One option, of course, is the classic realist option of finding equivalence. The other option is the updating and contextualizing of the story in temporal terms. And in between, the choices have been very limited. That choice range has to be broadened of what and how many kind of things can we do when we do not either immediately contextualize and modernize the text and or stick to the other one. So the experimental options have to be opened out, broadened, and that's where young people come in. That's where creative thinking comes in. Okay, so we'll just take the two last questions being asked here. One is directly for Q. If you could be, these are very broad, and you've heard this question thousands of times, I'm sure, Q. But again, people want to know at different corners of the world. One question is very simple: celluloid versus digital. What do you prefer? Which is better? Which I think Q is the one who can answer that, if there is any answer to it. And there is another question which is regarding censorship. If you're making films as explicit as Gandu and Garbage, any broadcasting through censorship OTT, do you have to censor them? And what is the process then that you have to go through? So quick answers, not because we don't have much time.
Yeah, well, it has something to do with the idea of temples already that we've been talking about. These are all temples: the film, the structure of film, the structure of
Yeah.
books. We are living in a post-pandemic situation. This has not happened in anybody's lifetime. And if anybody is under the strange thought that everything will return to normal, it fucking won't. So basically, we have seen the desecration of our temples. We are seeing we are hearing them fall and seeing them fall in some cases every day. And now is I think, a very, very good time to stop thinking about all these things altogether. Censorship, how you are programmed to accept what is okay, what is not, how you would want to be a filmmaker and break into this scene or that scene. You become writer and you are called to Jaipur. That shit is over. So I think for young people, this is a great time. Find your form. Don't be like, don't think about anything that anybody has done before as any milestone. But keep one thing in mind, which is the basis of hip hop culture, which I closely associate with, and I truly believe that that's the kind of lifestyle that perhaps will make us understand what we are as citizens of the world and people who have been on the other side, so to speak. And that word is respect. And this respect is very critical to whatever you do and at any point of time in any form or any media. That is irrelevant. If what you're doing has respect coded into the source, then that becomes very, very, very potent. It no longer requires anyone else to come and legitimize you, because you've legitimized yourself by respecting what you have to respect. And everybody knows what they have to respect. And then they are told otherwise. I think essentially human beings have the ability, everyone has it, to understand what you need to respect. Other people and other sensibilities. The other, what you do not understand, respect that. And once you do that, your work will start reflecting it and it will be free. And like a hip hop crew, you'll be able to dance or make music or sell merchandise or, give TED Talks. Who knows, what you will get to do. It's all multiple form now. Don't restrict yourself to any form either.
Okay, thank you so much. We have come to the end, so I need to call Subrat in, and thank you so much for a very delightful conversation to both Bhaskar and Q. Be here. I think Subrat will have to say something.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think the flavor of the conversation is still tingling in my senses. And I think on the platforms like this, you can imagine if you have interesting speakers, thinkers together on one platform, your 75 minutes doesn't feel like a drag. It feels like a very flavorful dish that you are enjoying. Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. And I think I take away a couple of things. I love the opening of Wittgenstein and Derek Jarman, and the way we end it, questioning have to, like Bhaskar pointed out, what is the question of have to in our forms that we're working on, and respecting the other. I think these are three broad ideas that I'm taking away from the 75 minutes. And folks at Ravenshaw University and Film Society, we will keep working and bringing in new ideas, new thinkers, new practitioners, and hopefully in the brave new world, we discover newer flavors. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.